Hello and welcome to Connect the World. I'm Lynda Kinkade in Atlanta, filling in for Becky Anderson. Good to have you with us. We begin with Special Air Mission 41, a flight that would take former U.S. President George Herbert Walker Bush on his final journey to Washington. 4 days of memorial services begin today for the late president, who has been honored across the political spectrum for a lifetime of service. The Bush family will arrive at a funeral home in Texas this hour. They'll soon board the temporarily rebranded Air Force One to accompany Mr. Bush's body to Washington. He'll lie in state at the U.S. Capitol until a memorial service on Wednesday at the Washington National Cathedral. Well, so many tributes have been pouring in, as well as touching photos like this one. Mr. Bush's spokesman tweeted the image of the late president's service dog sleeping next to his casket. The caption says it all: mission complete. Well, let's go now to CNN's Ed Lavandera live in Houston, Texas. And Ed, a week to honor the late president starting today, and preparations already underway to bring his casket to Washington, D.C.
Yeah, it's the beginning of a moving week expected here, not only in the city of Houston, but also in Washington, D.C. We're here later today. The focus of the tributes to the former president will begin. Here in about an hour and a half here in the city of Houston, we will see our first glimpse of the former First Family as they begin the process of escorting the casket of the former president back to Washington, D.C. For the memorial service on Wednesday. So about an hour and a half, you will see on board the government aircraft, which is the plane when the president, the current sitting president, uses, is known as Air Force One. This was the same aircraft that brought President Trump back from the G20 summit down in Argentina over the weekend. That plane was redirected here to Houston, and the name of this flight will be known as Special Mission 41. Of course, 41 reference to President George H.W. Bush's standing as the 41st president of the United States. And escorting the casket will be the former president, his son, George W. Bush, as well as other family members and close friends and confidants. They will be boarding that plane, and it will be a solemn ceremony there. You will hear "Hail to the Chief," which is obviously the hymn that plays when presidents enter the rooms, as well as a 21-gun salute will echo through the airs of this crisp morning here in December in Houston. Then we'll begin the flight. The casket will lie in state at the U.S. Capitol tonight, starting tonight until Wednesday morning. There will be a memorial service on Wednesday, then return back here to Houston that night, so that there will be another memorial service on Thursday, before a train ride with the casket up to the town of College Station and Texas A&M University, where the former president's presidential library sits, and that's where he will be laid to rest next to his wife and their 3-year-old daughter, Robin, who died of leukemia back in the 1950s. So it is a long series of events for this final goodbye to this former president.
It certainly is, Ed, and we're just looking at the live shot at that funeral home in Houston, Texas, and we will come back to that in about 20 minutes' time or so, when the family of the late president are expected to arrive to begin the final preparations. Ed Lavandera, thanks so much. Well, the White House was a much different place back in the days when George H.W. Bush occupied the Oval Office. A former CNN White House correspondent tweeted a picture of himself interviewing Mr. Bush in 1992. Frank Sesno wrote, "He believed in America. He didn't attack its institutions, embraced friends, respected political adversaries." Well, Frank is now the director of the School of Media and Public Affairs at George Washington University, and he joins us now live. Good to have you with us, Frank.
Great to be here.
You, of course, did the last interview with President Bush before he lost re-election, and you wrote there in your tweet about how much he achieved. Just describe his service to the country.
Well, of course, his service predated his presidency. You know, when he was a Navy pilot, he served at the United Nations. He was a member of Congress. He was an ambassador abroad, and he, of course, was vice president to Ronald Reagan. But as president, there was a vast array of things he did. Domestic legislation, he pushed and passed the Americans with Disabilities Act, a signature piece of legislation in the United States. He updated the Clean Air Act that had originally been passed in 1970. So the amendments of 1990 made a vast stretch of kind of changes to it to deal with greenhouse gases, yes, but also acid rain, which had taken a major toll. And a lot of the legislation that was written was sort of a model for later cap and trade legislation that could have been used as a way to really deal with greenhouse gases and climate change, but led the way there. He was a veto president. He had a Democratic Congress, so more than 40 vetoes, so he tried to stop things. It wasn't all happiness and nice here in Washington. But really, I think the world will long remember, and should, his two signature achievements on the global stage. One, managing the very, very difficult situation as the Soviet Union crumbled and the wall came down. I was with him on the Malta summit where he met Mikhail Gorbachev and essentially said, I will not gloat, I will not dance on this grave. You know, John Kennedy went to Berlin as the wall went up and said, Ich bin ein Berliner. George Herbert Walker Bush never went to Berlin when the wall came down and said, we have won. It was more important for him to manage that and the reunification of Germany. And then the big coalition he put together to push Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. So in a few short years, 4 years, he was president of very, very consequential time in global history. And given the constraints of government and democracy and his own frustrations, he accomplished quite a bit.
Yeah, he certainly did accomplish a lot in that 4 years, that one term he had. But you mentioned it wasn't all happiness, because so often, you know, in the passing of someone, we focus so much on just the good things. I just want to bring up a quote from David Greenberg, who writes in Politico. He says, respect for the dead must coexist with respect for the historical record. In the case of George Bush, this balancing act means acknowledging not only his positive qualities and achievements, as so many outlets have already done, but also what may have been his defining political hallmark, his cynicism. Do you think there's a risk of his flaws or shortcomings being glossed over?
Well, maybe in the days just after his death, and as people are preparing to send him off and mourn him as his funerals and procession move across the country. But there's been a lot of discussion, and there will be more, and there should be some now, about his shortcomings. He enjoyed very much governing, but he didn't much like to campaign, and he kind of jobbed some of that out, and there was some very nasty and dirty campaigning, so it wasn't all, you know, respect and integrity down the line. The famous Willie Horton ads showing an African-American convict who was released from prison under the governorship of his then presidential adversary, Michael Dukakis, in 1988. Wasn't Dukakis's doing, but it was really seen widely as kind of a dog whistle, racist ad in many ways. That was a Bush campaign. He didn't like being challenged on a number of things. That last interview I did, I was pressing him on his role in the Iran-Contra affair, which was Ronald Reagan's scandal, arms for hostages. He never answered questions happily or completely in the Iran-Contra affair. And he ultimately he lost re-election, partly because much of the country saw him as out of touch. He was kind of that blue blood, wealthy Republican from New England, Northeast United States, that didn't really connect, especially as the country had gone through recession with working people who had lost a lot. So he was not perfect by any means, but and history will have to take that into account as well.
Yeah, but no doubt he certainly had the ability to reach across the political aisle and bring the country together, which, of course, many are saying the country needs an injection of that right now. We'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Frank Sesno, good to have you with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.